At last, the long-awaited Ahsoka series premiered. This has been a series that I've been waiting for ever since Star Wars Rebels came to a conclusion 5 years ago, and I must say, this did not disappoint. I felt like I grew up with some of these characters, watching the Clone Wars or Rebels every week a new episode premiered, so I really haven't had this level of emotional investment in the characters really since Season 4 of Rebels. There's a lot that I want to talk about in this review, and I already have a feeling it's going to be on the long side, so I better get going. The first episode opens up with a crawl in red text, which was not only something very surprising for me, but I think it really shows how different this series is going to be. This isn't just another Star Wars show. This is an event every week when a new episode drops, and the adjusted release time shows that too. Everything feels different with this series. The Mandalorian has been good, it's had its ups and downs, but this is a galaxy-altering story on a scale we haven't seen since the sequels. The stakes are bigger, and the red crawl reminded me of how unique the Siege of Mandalore felt as well. Yeah, it's a part of a larger series, but this one specific story is important, so here's some red text to make sure you recognize that. I also want to briefly bring up how amazing the credits were. I love the font used, and the motion graphics themselves were mesmerizing. It looked like old tongue in there, so I feel like I'm definitely going to have to go through that and see what I can translate from that, if it's anything special or not. I felt rushed to get from one episode to the next, and then get this review going, but when I re-watch these episodes I'm going to have to make sure I watch through the credits, because the music was just so amazing. I could spend this entire review just talking about the score alone. The Kiners really outdid themselves for this. From start to finish, every new piece sounds unique and perfect for the mood and story, and they barely used any familiar themes yet. Once that iconic Ahsoka theme plays in the background, I guarantee I'm going to be an absolute emotional mess. Going back to the beginning of the first episode, we pick up pretty much right after Ahsoka's episode in The Mandalorian Season 2, which I think was a common theory after the footage we got in the trailers. We saw Skoll and Hati attacking a New Republic vessel, so it was pretty safe to say that they were breaking out Elsbeth to kick off the series. We got more of it in the first episode than the second, but something I'm really looking forward to with this series is seeing the New Republic in a way we've never seen them before. We've gotten a little from The Mandalorian as the series has progressed, but other than some books and comics, we didn't get much from them in something like the sequels. So this is really our first time getting a good look at the new government in live action. And although most of it so far is just cool, detailed ship designs and different New Republic officials, we do see a bit of the new government's flaws in the second episode on Corellia. There are Imperials still working for the New Republic to dismantle or build in the shipyards, because without these workers, they wouldn't be able to operate, and that's a very concerning issue that Hera and Ahsoka come across. They're out here trying to stop another war from occurring by stopping Thrawn from returning from who knows where, but there are still Imperials that are a problem within the New Republic's own systems. We know there were a lot of problems with the way the New Republic rose and tried to govern peacefully, and I doubt this is the only issue we'll come across in the series. Back to the first episode, Skoll and Hati break out Elsbeth, and this was one of the multiple moments in these first two episodes, the other main one being the action with Hera and the Phantom in the second episode, where I think it really would have benefited me to come into this not seeing any of the released footage or trailers. I know myself well enough to know that this would be nearly impossible for me to do, but I know a few people who did that, so I'd be interested to see what they thought of these moments. The action is nice and all, but when I've already seen part of what happens, it isn't too hard for me to put it together and figure out how the scene ends before I've even seen the episode. It was still great though seeing the villains in an extended sequence. The action here with the lightsabers was short and quick, but I thought it was still well done, and Skoll gets his own hallway scene to go along with Luke, Vader, and Maul. With the knowledge of Ray Stevenson's passing coming into this episode, seeing his character walk down that ramp and appear for the first time hit so much harder than I was expecting, as did the in memoriam for him at the end of the episode. His character looks to be so much more layered than the average Inquisitor or mercenary, so I'm really looking forward to seeing more of him throughout the series. There was also something about Elsbeth in this initial scene that I didn't seem to buy as the big villain for the series, despite already seeing her in The Mandalorian. I assumed it could have been the prisoner outfit, or the tone to her voice, but by the time I had gone through both episodes, I was completely on board with her again. She's a very mysterious character, but as an audience we can tell that she is very knowledgeable, which makes her fascinating to watch. Going on to the next part of the episode, we see Ahsoka on a new planet from the trailers, which we later learn is Arcana, an ancient stronghold for the witches of Dathomir. It's mostly in ruins by now, but we could tell that it was some ancient religion or force being. The orbs in the wall definitely reminded me of the Zepho a bit, and the figures looked similar to the Force priestesses, so I was really hoping for some neat connection there, but it just turned out to be the Night Sisters, which I don't really mind as long as there's a deeper connection here with them. I'm not quite sure if the series will go this direction or not, but I would love to be able to explore their culture even more and learn more about the Force throughout the series. On Arcana, Ahsoka is searching for a map that leads to Thrawn, and initially I figured this would be the overall story of the series, where these 8 episodes would deal with finding where they are, and then the Filoni movie would be where we finally see Ezra again. But after the way things progressed throughout the premiere, with Sabine opening the map and Elsbeth building some sort of vessel to go get Thrawn might have a larger role in the series than I initially expected, which would make it likely that Ezra returns here too. Ahsoka is able to get the map, and is then confronted by droids of the 7th Fleet, the same ones she encountered on Corvus. There isn't anything overly impressive with the action throughout these 2 episodes, but it was solid enough. It felt very physical and fast-paced. It did seem odd, though, that the droids self-destructing would annihilate the entire place. We then learn that Huyang is already with her, and I do hope that we get to learn how they reunited. We don't know what happened to Huyang after the fall of the Jedi Order, but Ahsoka seeking him out after returning from Malachor must have taken some effort, and not just be a complete accident. So even if it is only in a throwaway line, that is something I would like to learn. Initially, I was a bit hesitant about Huyang's involvement in the series, as it seemed to be a bit out of nowhere, but these 2 episodes really helped me come around on him. There's a lot of playful banter and comedic dialogue when he's around, which helps lighten the mood a bit, and I'll admit, even got me to laugh a few times surprisingly. But his lightsaber knowledge also comes in handy, as does his overall experience with a variety of Jedi, so he's very qualified to help guide both Ahsoka and Sabine on their journeys as master and apprentice. Ahsoka and Hera reunite, and at least from the vibes that I get here, it seems like Ahsoka has been in contact with the New Republic for a while now. I do hope we get to go back in time a bit and see, or at least learn about the parts of Ahsoka's story that we missed, because there's a lot of big character moments that we're potentially missing out on, and there's a lot of backstory we seem to be missing out on between Ahsoka and Sabine too. Something happened that caused their bond to fall out, and although I do think we will learn about that at some point, of course I want to know it sooner rather than later. Something that I did notice was that everything so far seems to look very good visual effects and volume-wise, as well as the character designs. It took me a bit of time here to really accept Winstead as Hera. I think I'm still in that process even now, but the character itself looks very good in live action, and the dialogue and interactions all fit with what I remember from animation, especially the banter between Hera and Chopper. Lothal makes its live-action debut next, and Ezra is mentioned multiple times in the span of a few minutes. His absence feels bigger than ever, and I'm sure he's going to be a main motivating factor for many of the characters here. We get to see the Lothal mural in live action, and I love the way it got translated. This is also where the Rebels fan in me started to freak out. Where on Lothal, Ezra and Sabine are both absent but mentioned at the ceremony, and we see Governor Azadi and Senator Jai Kell, both of which were original characters from Rebels. We then get introduced to Sabine in live action, and with her being my favorite, or at least one of my favorite characters to come out of Rebels, she's been in one of the aspects of this series that I'm most excited for. She's introduced with some very different rock music, and her rebel side is quickly on display as she decides not to show up for the ceremony, which marks 7 years after the Battle of Lothal. And it makes sense, because it would remind her of Ezra being gone. That battle wasn't a complete victory for her, she lost a friend. She takes us back to the old comms tower where Ezra used to live, and I had a blast looking in the background of shots for familiar Easter eggs that we saw in Rebels. I have to applaud the attention to detail here with some of them, like the old Trooper helmet collection of Ezra's. She pulls up a hologram of Ezra, and although I'm still going to have to wait to see him in person to fully decide if I like the live-action casting for the character, at least from the voice alone, as Fondi sounds very similar to Ezra. And something small here, but it really stood out to me, was that he tells her that she was like a sister to him. I had always sensed some sort of romance between them, at least in the early seasons of Rebels, but I guess they grew out of that, and it's more of a sibling love now. Something I really loved about this first episode in particular was how there was so much pain and emotion built into every action, between the music and the knowledge of what these characters have been through. Every slow movement or change of expression had meaning to it. Eventually, Ahsoka arrives on Lothal to meet Sabine, and it's a scene very similar to the Rebels epilogue, but not exactly the same. And here it occurred to me that we as fans have operated under the assumption since the Rebels finale, that both Ezra and Thrawn are out there alive somewhere, waiting to come home. But for these characters in the universe, they have no clue what happened to him. They all believe that Ezra is most likely dead, and they'll never see him again. There's a lot of bitterness between Sabine and Ahsoka, and I'm looking forward to fleshing out this relationship even more, and hopefully seeing what transpired in the past between them. I've done a lot of praising of these episodes so far, but something that was a bit hit or miss with me were the reveals through dialogue. It does a lot of telling rather than showing, and while it doesn't bother me that much when it was things I really wanted to know, like where the mysterious ruins were, when Ahsoka tells Hera about walking away from the Jedi, it felt like only a way to fill in viewers who haven't seen the Clone Wars, rather than actually serving a purpose here in the episode. The first episode ends with Hatzi coming to Lothal to steal the map from Sabine, and there was some impressive hand-to-hand combat with Sabine and the droids. We see her briefly wield Ezra's lightsaber, which she's made some modifications to, but she's easily outmatched here. And while I was expecting for the episode to roughly end the way it did, I was shocked that they went the route of Sabine getting stabbed. Of course we know she survives it, but unless it gets referenced down the line or something, I do wonder why Filoni decided to do her like that, if not for some larger purpose. The second episode wasn't as long, but it still managed to fit in quite a lot of story. There's a lot of tension between Ahsoka and Sabine after the events of the first episode, but it eventually leads to them reuniting as master and apprentice. Even though it probably had about the same amount of action as the first episode, this one felt a lot slower because of how many one-on-one conversations there were. Some, like the one between Sabine and Hera, were greatly appreciated, because I got to see those two characters interact again with that mother-daughter-like relationship. However, some just felt like they really slowed down the episode too much and didn't necessarily take us anywhere. The group of villains for the series arrive on Cetos, what I believe is a new planet created for the series, and here Elsbeth talks about an ancient people from a distant galaxy, which, since she uses Night Sister magic afterward on the map, I can only assume that's what she's talking about, so it does feel like we'll learn even more about the Night Sisters in the series. I love the way she expands the hologram, and she mentions the pathway to Peridia, which we don't know much about yet, but I'm sure we'll learn more as the series progresses. Like I said earlier, this is a very lore-heavy premiere. Meanwhile, Ahsoka and Hera go to Corellia. The episode here does a good job of building up the suspense with the glances from the workers, to the point where it all eventually spirals out of control. We get a bit of action, see Chopper and the Phantom in live action, and I was hoping to learn more about Merrick during the duel with Ahsoka, but I don't even think a line was said, so we're still waiting to find out if that's anyone important or not. Also, I've got to say, I love the fist pump from Chopper. Good job, buddy. The episode ends with Sabine cutting her hair in a way reminiscent of Kanan, and she gets back in her armor and is ready to train with Ahsoka again. It felt right that the premiere would end with the recreation of the Rebels epilogue, and it was the first of what I expect to me many times that the series got me choked up a bit, but I quickly snapped out of it when Ahsoka wasn't in her white gear. It's something small and probably meaningless, but I really like that costume for her, and I feel like it's very representative of where she's at in her journey at that time. So while it makes sense for her to be in the same gray cloak that we just saw her in, it was extremely disappointing. The episode comes to a close with the reveal of what Elsbeth is building to bring Thrawn back to the known galaxy. A giant hyperspace ring-looking vessel called the Eye of Sion, named after a very famous Sith Lord, which will probably be talked about later this week. I know for sure I'll have some character videos going up, in case you're not familiar with who Sabine, Hera, or Ezra are. I've got some other video ideas based on these episodes already, but we'll just have to see what I can get around to making. What did you think of the Ahsoka premiere? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like the video, and subscribe for coverage of Ahsoka as a new episode premieres every week. And remember to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Thank you all for watching, and remember, the Force will be with you. Always.